How many believe it ought to be legal to shoot those folks? Let me see your hand. Okay. God does have a sense of humor, doesn't he? He lets morning people end up married to night owls, and I think that's just for the angels' amusement. But it is a joy to be here. I do have to let you know I don't like $3 and $4 gasoline. I think it's way too expensive. But how many think a $4 cup of coffee makes sense? Okay, if it's by the cup, I will drink it. And along with my friend Brother Paul, I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. But how many believe a little caffeine to get them going never hurt anybody? All right, so to the Mormons here that preach against it, I'm sorry, but we've got ourselves up and going this morning. For those of you that are hearing me for the first time in your life, let me just do a very quick introduction. I am a trial attorney. Went to Duke Law School, and I litigate cases all across America. We pick juries. We defend pastors like yourself. How many have as a goal not going to prison? May I see your hand, please? Okay, so set the bar kind of low. We'll help you. And with all of that, we defend cases. Now, we also prosecute cases. We go before the Supreme Court. A lot of folks are familiar with the Terry Shiloh case. I was the lead attorney for the family. Hard to believe that was 10 years ago. And we won't go into a lot of detail on that, but how many figured out the secular media doesn't give you the whole picture? And the right to die quickly becomes the duty to die, something important to watch in the legislature, where families should make decisions, not doctors or government officials. So we litigate cases, and so I am a trial attorney. Number two, we work on public policy. We're certainly involved in Tallahassee, but a lot of work in Washington, D.C. How many believe the Capitol is a mess right now? And so we meet with the Congress. Oftentimes when I am there, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, will say, David, tell me what the people in the churches are saying. And so we try to be your voice in Washington. We have offices across the nation. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida. How many like it that we're close to Florida? The Lord actually blessed us there. We got a free building. How many like the words free building? Actually, a little 3-acre lot. I'm looking at some water, so it's kind of a nice spot there in St. Petersburg. We also have an office in Dallas, Washington, D.C., and then we also are opening a small office in Southern California. And so we work across the nation. Hundreds of attorneys partner with us as affiliates, and so we are certainly honored to defend the cases, to work on public policy. And then number three, I try to be a voice in the culture. Now, do that through Moody Radio. And by the way, how many love and appreciate Moody Radio? What a great ministry. And they do a phenomenal job, and appreciate what they do. I'm also on Fox News, CNN, some of the other television networks about once a month. Matter of fact, just came from Chicago. Was up there for the pastors' conference. Did some legal training up there. I rode to the airport yesterday with Dr. Gary Chapman. How many know the love languages God? Okay, love him, great man of God, great pastor. But I said, Dr. Chapman, when are you going to do love languages for lawyers? Somebody think that's a good idea. He said he's not sure there's a market for it. He's going to think about it. I said it kind of hurt my feelings when he came out with love languages for small pets ahead of lawyers. But anyway, Moody does a great job, and I preach in churches. So if you are ever interested in having me come to your church, I would be honored to do it. Then we also do seminars like these. And by the way, you're going to hear more about all pro pastors, but how many believe pastors need to help and encourage each other? Amen. And in all of that, can I give you a little thought? Good people can disagree and still be good people. How many believe that? Now, sometimes in the church world, we get a little, if you don't totally line up with me on everything, and by the way, I respect your preferences. How many believe we ought to respect each other's preferences? Okay, I mean, if the music in your church would blow the walls out, or if you are so stuffy, I mean, you're the round mouth choir opera, I don't care. I mean, that's between you, your people, the Lord. But how many believe we can still love one another? And it doesn't have to be where we, micro-evaluate, because as we're criticizing one another, how many understand the devil and his crowd are galvanizing? And they're coming together and sweeping this country like never before. So at the National Center for Life and Liberty, now remember that name, NCLL, we are there to serve you. We are going to, at the end of my talk, I'm going to hand out some cards and things, and I would like for you to contact us, stay connected with us, and let me explain kind of the concept. We will be your attorney. How many would like to have an attorney help you? Okay, we are glad to partner with you. We're glad to stand with you. Now, we do it as a ministry. How many believe the words lawyer to works for free don't connect up very much, okay? We do ask the church, if you can, to help support, because that then allows me to pay my staff and keep the lights on. But if you can help support the ministry, we want to be your general counsel. We will answer your questions. We will defend you. We will help you. And we would certainly encourage you to pray about that. If you have an attorney in your church, maybe one on your board, we will work with them. You know, we work with big ministries. We are legal counsel to some of the mega churches in our country, on down to tiny little startup churches that are just getting up and going. And by the way, how many believe the size of the church has nothing to do with the greatness of the church? You know, be careful, okay? And this is a philosophy sometimes that gets out in our world. If you're big or you got money, you succeeded. How many believe there's a lot of evildoers that are big and got money? And in the eyes of heaven, they're disappointing. I mean, there is a difference between a crowd and the church. You know, the football game, you get a crowd. Pornographers can get a crowd. You get a crowd with all sorts of things. But remember, a church is around that relationship with Jesus Christ. And so we come alongside, we partner with you. We don't force you to change anything about your theology or what you believe, but we help you avoid legal liability. We help you understand best practices. And so the NCAA, we're certainly honored to come alongside you. Now, let me jump into our topic. And for about the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk, take questions. We're going to deal with some of the cutting-edge legal issues. And then there's going to be a little moment where all pro pastors is going to come up with a few things, and then I'm going to stay for a Q&A session after that. So we'll take questions during this time, but then there will also be a Q&A session at the very end, and then we will have you out of here timely, and we're certainly, again, honored that you have come. So for our first-timers, greetings, a pleasure to meet you. For those of you that have been here before, but let me jump into what is probably, you already heard from our friends in Tallahassee, and I realize they don't live in Tallahassee, but the work that they're doing up there and the ministry up there. But in the vein of what is occurring in our country, how many have heard of the LGBT, and let's now add the new letter, Q? I mean, we're in a society right now that is almost hyper-fascinated with sexual orientation rights. I mean, being respectful. Bruce Jenner goes on TV as a conflicted cross-dresser, and 16 million Americans tune in, and it becomes news, and people talk about it, and we're watching this agenda. I mean, Indiana passes what is a religious liberty law. Now, basically, let me understand this law. Nobody will be prosecuted for their faith in the workplace. How many think that makes a little sense in today's world? And boy, they passed that law, and all of a sudden the Silicon Valley, which is California computers, starts blasting, and Salesforce CEO threatening to pull out of Indiana. And then Hollywood values start coming, and then the media, and boy, a governor like Mike Pence, who by the way is a good man, a believer, good fella, was fairly popular in his state. Boy, his popularity sinks, and they change the law, and they scramble backwards, because there is this powerful force out there in this agenda that is wanting to put their values into society in place of your values. And by the way, how many believe biblical values are under attack in America? Now, let me just give you a quick little snapshot, because you got to just understand how fast. And by the way, how many believe the devil's alive and well in this country? And so some of this is just his work in society. But 1961, that's 50 years ago, homosexuality is a crime in all 50 states. So let's just go back 50 years. That's criminal conduct. I mean, right now, this would be like the bank robbers getting together and saying, you know what, we got an image problem. You know, we don't rob banks. We're born this way. We have to rob banks. Okay, that's what happened back in the 60s. I mean, the homosexuals were criminals, and they rallied together. And there was one state that decriminalized it first, and it's not California, and it's not Massachusetts. Does anybody have an idea what state it was?
Illinois.
No, not Florida. A southern state wouldn't generally do it. Think Chicago.
Illinois. Illinois was the first state, and it wasn't really advocating homosexuality. What it was kind of that, remember, we're going into the 60s, Woodstock, hippies, kind of, they just didn't want to prosecute it anymore. It was just kind of like, whatever, let people do what they want. And about 20 states followed suit. 30 states kept it on the criminal books. Now, are you ready for this? Up until 2003. I'm going to believe that's just 12 years ago. Okay, so let's 12 years ago, including Florida, it was a crime to be a homosexual. I mean, you could be fined, you could go to jail. So we do need to understand just how rapidly all these changes are occurring, okay? A case came up out of Texas called the Lawrence decision. And interesting in that case, what happened, just give you a quick fact pattern, a couple of gay guys got in a fight, tore their apartment up. They broke windows, they smashed walls, and the neighbors called the cops. The cops arrested them for disorderly conduct, beat each other up, and for good measure, they tossed a sodomy charge on it. Said, you guys are a couple of gays, you shouldn't be doing this. Okay? So that was what was in the courts. Well, the gays were clever. What they did is they pled guilty to everything. They paid all their fines, they cleaned up all the criminal mess, except the sodomy charge. And they took that charge all the way up to the United States Supreme Court out of the state of Texas. And we're all adults here, so let me just tell you the argument. They said basically, if a woman can murder her baby in the name of sexual freedom, how many believe that sounds like Roe versus Wade? If a woman can murder her baby in the name of sexual freedom, we should be able to do what we want to do too. And by the way, that was the argument that won at the Supreme Court. How many see bad law stacking on bad law? I mean, just a little talking point. The whole homosexual rights movement rests on Roe versus Wade. Back in 1973, the right to privacy. That's what it's all hinged off of. And the homosexuals were even a little honest. They said, look, we're not killing anybody. I mean, you're letting women kill the babies. We're just, maybe our health will be diminished, maybe our lives will be shortened, but they said, we're not really killing anybody, so we should have this same freedom. And in 2003, 12 years ago, the United States Supreme Court agreed with them. And at that point, homosexual conduct was given constitutional protection where it could no longer be criminal. Okay, now think about that. I mean, let's think about another criminal act. How many believe child molesters are criminals? Okay, I mean, 12 years ago, that homosexuality was the same thing. It was a crime. Okay, and now all of a sudden it's decriminalized. Well, from 2003 up until today, how many believe some wild things have happened? Okay, they have gone from not just being decriminalized, but they want special protection in the workplace. They want the right to marry. And by the way, how many believe they are redefining marriage, bizarrely? I was looking over the transcripts of the marriage oral arguments, and there's a great line in there. Okay, they're same-sex marriage cases before the Supreme Court. There will be a ruling in late June. Right now, 36, maybe 37, kind of depends how you look at it. Florida's in there, by the way, because of judicial rulings. How many believe it's sad when one or two judges can overrule millions of people? That's what goes on. Okay, but basically have already allowed for same-sex marriage. The Sixth Circuit kind of skewed it a little bit. That's kind of the Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky boys. They kind of just said, hey, let the states do what they want. So that's what's created the issue before the Supreme Court. But the lady that is arguing in behalf of same-sex marriage is asked a question by Judge Alito, one of the Supreme Court justices. And, he says, it's 4 people. And he said, and let's say that they're educated. Matter of fact, he laughed. He said, let's say they're all attorneys. They know their legal rights. They know their constitutional rights. And there's 2 men and 2 women and no children. And they want to marry this group of 4. Is that acceptable under our United States Constitution? And you'll have to love the answer that this lady for the same-sex marriage couple said. She says, oh no, we wouldn't allow that. That would redefine marriage. Now, how do you understand the issue? It's all definition. You know, they're saying, well, you can't have group marriage, you can't have 4 people, but we'll have 2 same sex. And by the way, this is what the appeals courts are talking about in these cases. We are going to be on the slippery slope. Once you start these redefinitions, you're going to be into group marriage. Be prepared for family marriage. You say, wait, explain that to me. Again, appeals court judges, this is not, some preacher just cooking up crazy ideas. What do you do when you have a father who is a wealthy business owner? Okay? And he has a girlfriend. Okay? Because it would be criminal if he was having sexual relations with his son. But he has a girlfriend on the side because, we can disconnect the, sexual activity from the relationship. That's the new America. And he wants to marry his son, who also has a girlfriend. So there's nothing criminal between the two of them. But they wish to commit in marriage to each other because what happens? The business passes tax-free. So now all of a sudden you got millions of dollars in tax savings, potentially, and the family business stays within the family. And, it's generally designed to protect the spouse, but let's make it keep the spouse. And how many understand in America right now, when you move away from a standard? And by the way, what was the historical American standard? I can make it real simple for you. You preachers will get it easy. Genesis chapter 1. How many believe before sin entered into the world, God had a plan? Don't let anybody mess with you. What is traditional marriage? Because they'll say, well, it's polygamy or polyamory, or they got all these bizarre things, and they go to ancient civilizations. How many believe they're not going back far enough? They need to go to the Garden of Eden. They need to say, before sin entered into the world, God had a plan. It was a man and a woman. They were to have kids. Sin entered into the world. We've skewed it up ever since. But American law was designed to reflect God's very best back in Genesis chapter 1. You say, David, how did we reach this point? I mean, how in the world? The criminals back in the 60s, 2003, 30 plus states, it's still criminal conduct. How did we get here? The homosexuals had a plan. Let me tell you what it was. They executed it very well. They said, number 1, we're going to capture the media. And how many believe they have captured the media? They said, number 2, we're going to capture the politicians. And with the politicians, we get the military. And how many believe they have captured the politicians? Republican, Democrat, doesn't really matter. They're all pretty soft on the issues. Some will still stand up for traditional marriage. But the reality is the politicians, Indiana's the perfect example. They fold like a bad soup. Okay, they are not standing on this issue. Number 3, they said we are going to get big business. And how many believe they have got big business in this country? If you wonder again, look at what happened in Indiana. Hollywood jumps in, Silicon Valley, big companies. The idea is it's bad for business if you stand up on these moral issues. Now, have you ever thought about what the philosophy under that is? I'll tell you what they're teaching in the business schools. They will teach that if you are pro-gay, and by the way, this applies to the green movement too. How many of you seen the green, the environmental stuff? Okay. If you're green or pro-gay, that people will spend more money on your goods and services because they will feel loyal to your company. And you say, well, what about the people who either don't care about the environment or are traditional values? Okay, traditional values being, family values, more of a traditional biblical evangelical perspective. Here's what they teach them. You can agree or disagree. Those people will always go to the cheapest price. Now, whether that's true or not, how many believe that's kind of sad? That's what they think. So basically, they say being pro-homosexual is good for the bottom line. The Christian people, we just put a sale on and they'll show up. And that's kind of how they treat us. How many believe as Christians we need to maybe start using our economic wherewithal with a little more value-based approach? So they said we want big business. They got big business. Number 4, they said we want the schools. How many believe they have got the schools of America? Now, if you wonder, let me depress you here a little bit. Our schools are a mess in America right now. By the way, as pastors, how many agree with me on this? Okay, let me tell you what's happened. California. Now, you say, praise God, we don't live in California. But before I depress you a little bit, remember, it's our biggest state. All the curriculum gets written to that. Common Core is nationalized curriculum. It's sweeping the country.
So California now has gender identity rights. Now what is this? Any kid from kindergarten through the 12th grade can walk into a public school and decide whether he is a boy or a girl that day. I mean, just walk in. So let's 7th grade boy comes cruising on in. Today I'm a girl. No doctor's note, no parental permission. The kid just declares it. It's his right. And at that moment, he gets his girl clothes, his girl name, his girl showers, locker room, sports teams. He's a girl by his own declaration. Now, the next day, he could change back. Why? Because he's questioning. He's trying to figure out who he is, and we want him to find his way. I mean, let me tell you what these teachers are being told. Don't say boys sit over here and girls sit over there. Why? Because you're imposing your values of what is a boy or what is a girl on the children. What you should say is children who like blue sit over here. Children who like pink sit over here. Kids who like dogs sit over here. Kids who like cats. Because then you're letting them find for themselves who they are without your discriminatory or oppressive viewpoints being jammed into their little minds that they should be a certain way or not. You're relieving them of all these pressures. Now, how many believe that is bizarre educational policy? And by the way, how many of you like me grew up in a little different era? How many remember when people, not your parents, could spank you? How many remember those days? All right, let's talk for just a moment. This is therapy. I mean, neighbors spanked, right? School spanked, churches spanked. I mean, let's be candid. Total strangers spanked. I mean, you'd be sitting in the market, somebody would slap you, your parents would say, thank you, he needed that. I mean, it was just... And by the way, if you ever got spanked by mistake, did your parents apologize? No, they had a real simple line, like, I'm just getting you for something you got away with before I didn't know about. Like there's just like this little beading bank account that we just fill up and, you know, we draw down on it. And I do need to let you know, if I ever got spanked by somebody not my parents, one prayer in life, please don't let my parents find out. Because I would explain to my mother that my civil rights have been violated. And you know what she'd do? She'd re-violate my rights. It never worked out for me ever. But the homosexuals said we want the schools, and how many believe not only are they getting the schools, but this whole philosophy of ignoring what the parents want, certainly ignore what the church or the pastors want, and let the children decide for themselves, is exploding in our school system. Number 5, they said we will get the churches. Now, you're sitting here saying, not my church, and I believe that. Can I tell you why I believe that? Number 1, you're at this seminar, which means you care, you're concerned. Number 2, you're evangelical, you're biblical, you look to the Bible, you're going to do what you believe is scripturally right, and you're not going to let that philosophy permeate your ministry. But for just a moment, can I talk about what's going on in the religious community at large? How many believe the religious community at large is capitulating wildly? Now, again, we're not Catholic here, and we're not trying to pick on any groups, but I mean, where are the Catholics going to fall out? I mean, the Pope's making funny comments. They still have a doctrine that's kind of like against it, but, you know, let's not make it a big deal with abortion or life issues or homosexuality. So once a group goes neutral, how many understand neutral? You've capitulated. And by the way, let me say this, some of our evangelical leaders have done the same thing. I'm just not going to make it an issue. Well, could I slow down for just a moment? And by the way, I don't believe you should be contentious. How many believe you ought to have a good spirit? But if you're not going to make it an issue, at what point are you going to stick up for the Bible? Because, I mean, you say, well, I don't really care about creation, evolution. I don't really care about the New Age stuff. I don't really care about the homosexual stuff. I don't really care about all the things in the Bible. Well, at some point, when will you care? I mean, because at some point, the only thing left is the gospel. Okay, are you going to care when they say telling a child there's only one way to heaven is child abuse? Will you care then? I mean, we're on that slippery slope. Okay, I mean, let's talk for just a moment Anti-Reparative Laws. You say, what in the world is that? That means you're not supposed to repair gay people. Leave them alone, okay? If you're a counselor, you can lose your state license. California, New Jersey have it on the books, but it's very trendy right now. Okay, anti-reparative. Because they have professionally determined that if you walk up to a gay kid and you say, don't be gay, do something else, that you're hurting them, that that's bad. And this is what the professionals are doing. Now, how many understand that professional standard will quickly become the child abuse standard? Now all of a sudden somebody turns around and says, this youth pastor just told a bunch of kids not to be gay, and 2 of them were gay, and he's now being charged with child abuse. You say, David, could that happen in our country? How many understand that's the agenda? They are coming at your church. I think 2 ways. Number 1, there will be lawsuits. I don't think they're going to come at your church to just, drag you out. I mean, if you were up preaching about family values and all of a sudden, the government shows up and drags you out the front door, you become a little media hero. I mean, CNN's there, Fox is there, you're emailing from jail. We hope your wife is crying a little bit. It would look good on TV. And I mean, you become sort of a hero. And so I don't think they're going to do that. Okay? I think what they're going to do is say, well, this pastor's been sued for child abuse because they're sitting there abusing and bullying these poor gay children. I understand most people in America aren't going to be real excited about that story. They're going to go, oh, another one? And all of a sudden, and your insurance carrier is going to say, what did you say? They're going to drop coverage. So now you're going to lose your buildings, and that's part of the game. They're going to marginalize you through litigation. But then number 2, be prepared for tax-exempt status to be challenged. Okay? There is a thing under the law that says you cannot violate public policy and be tax-exempt. You say, well, what's public policy? They define it 2 ways right now. Number 1, you can't be advocating the overthrow of the government. So Al-Qaeda cannot be tax exempt. I mean, that makes a little sense. You know what I mean? You may blow up our buildings, we won't give you a receipt for it. Okay, so I mean, it's kind of it does make some sense. And then number 2, you can't be racially discriminatory. And we don't believe in racial discrimination, but if you're a racist organization in any respect, you can't be tax exempt in the United States of America, okay? And by the way, that case, just kind of interestingly, was the Bob Jones University case. Okay, just to give you a little scenario, it wasn't necessarily an racially discriminatory group. They had a dating policy at a Bible college. And again, ahead of my time, ahead of most of your time, but they just basically said kids have to date kids of the same color unless mom and dad send a note. Okay, that was a Bible college rule. You may like that rule, you may not like that rule, but basically that was it. And the IRS came in and said that's racially discriminatory, and they took away Bob Jones University's tax-exempt status. And today, all of you are fully aware of what we call the racial non-discrimination statements. You have a school, it's in your statement. You have a preschool, it's in your statement. It's very much the law. But that was a Bob Jones University case from the Supreme Court that basically said you can't have any policies that impact people based on race and remain tax exempt. And we don't really disagree with that, but how many see where the homosexuals are right now? Okay, they're running right behind race. Now, how many believe that is a horrific abuse of the civil rights movement? And what they have done is they have said, we were born this way, and we cannot change. Now, I want to touch on this a minute because you do minister here, okay? And let me say a couple things. I do believe some homosexuals believe they can't change for a variety of reasons. Number 1, they were abused as kids. Statistically, most male homosexuals were abused by a same-sex person very young. And how many believe that can scar and hurt people? But then number 2, there is something in the scripture, and you know what it is. It's called besetting sins. Now, let's just be candid. Everybody here has different besetting sins, okay? I mean, some of you in this room are stingy. I mean, you hang on to your money. I mean, you're just a tightwad. I mean, your prayer when you go out to eat is somebody else picks up the tab. I mean, that's just you, okay? And that's your besetting sin. You need to get over that a little bit. You need to do something every once in a while, okay? But on the other hand,
Some of you sitting here are so generous, you're irresponsible. I mean, you don't pay your bills, and you're just giving money away, and you're broke all the time because you're just throwing cash out the door. And somebody would say, whoa, brother, slow down just a little bit. You're so generous, it's become a fault, and you have besetting sin. Now, I don't know what you're struggling with, but how many understand there are homosexuals that this is their besetting sin? It is a temptation. It is something that grips them. But how many believe the Bible teaches that God's grace is able to help overcome any besetting sin? There is nothing that you have to say you're trapped in, but that is the power of it. But I do think sometimes, now I'm just talking here to you, we come off as a little judgmental or harsh towards the homosexual community, and we're a lot softer on other sins. I mean, there is an element where sometimes the church world says, bless God, we're not going to let a homosexual join our church. And by the way, you have that legal right. Okay, you can set the bar for your membership wherever you want. But we're going to let somebody that's been married and divorced 19 times, we'll let them gladly join our church. Now, how many see just a little of the inconsistency there? And the homosexual says, wait a minute, you won't even let me in, and you're going to let that guy in, and where's your scriptural justification for that? And so the homosexual community is looking at your church. Now, you say, David, you're giving me indigestion, you're stressing me out, and it's not just the barbecue, okay? It is, I'm not liking all of this. What can we do? Well, a couple of things. Number one, it is absolutely imperative that you update your church's organizational documents. Okay, now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, okay? When I give you the card, if you fill out the card and fill it out intelligently, like where we can read it legibly, all that good stuff, I will send you an updated sample that's a couple weeks old, okay? Where we will send you issues and things to look at for your church's organizational documents. Now again, I don't get into all the theology. I mean, I'll help you with, if you're wondering how to state you believe the Bible or believe in Jesus, we'll help you. But I mean, the reality is, the theological stuff you can do, but I'm going to give you all the legal stuff on how not to be sued, on how to protect your church. By the way, on how to protect the children in your church. How many believe you ought to have child protection policies? How many believe you need financial accountability policies? By the way, just a little toss in here, if you are trying to get your church a little younger, how many have noticed some of the evangelical churches are tipping a little gray? Okay, we're lining up the walkers and wheelchairs, we're losing the young people. Okay, so, the bottom line is, can I tell you what young people are looking for? Let's say the 50 and under crowd. They want child protection, they want the kids safe, and they want some financial transparency. Now, the older people don't care. The older people, pastor stole a bunch of money. Well, he's a good man. We'll forgive him. And on they go. Okay, they're beating kids in the basement. Well, when I was a kid, they had nails in the belt. Okay, well, I understand. You can hang out with the old people to the bitter end. They don't care. Okay, but the younger people, once they figure out you don't know what you're doing with the kids, they're done because they're not going to put their kids or grandkids there. And then number two, if they feel like the finances are messed up, they will quit giving and then they will no longer be part of it. And you lose them. So you say, our church is tipping gray. Well, these are two things that, by the way, are stewardship for the Lord. And we build that into that Constitution and bylaws, but that will help your church grow and appeal and instill some confidence in the younger crew. So you've got to update your documents to reflect your position on these statements. Now, we have streamlined it, okay? There was a day, and I just think it's too disgusting. How many believe there's just too much perversity in the world anymore? And there was a day that I would have said, you know what, you need to say you're against homosexuality, and you need to say you're against transgenderism, and you need to say you're against bestiality, and you need to say you're against all this. But how many figured out the devil keeps coming up with new depravity? And then number two, you know what, there's just a point at which some of that's kind of disgusting to put in your church bylaws. And so we have cleaned it up, streamlined it up where it's very strong, it's legally enforceable, it covers everything, but it doesn't add any nasty list of things or put anything in there that is distasteful. So important that you state where you believe. Now, how many understand before you go back to your congregation, they're going to have to understand a couple of things. How many believe your congregation needs to understand times have changed in America? Okay, I mean, you're going to have some people in your church going, we've never done it that way before. You went to that seminar for that free lunch, and that lawyer got you all fired up. Okay, well, you're going to have to help them understand times have changed. Okay, back in 2003, it was a crime. 12 years down the road, it's a different ballgame. And by the way, lots of areas of ministry have changed. I mean, how many remember the old bus ministries? How many remember the old bus ministries? I mean, what would we do? We would go get a vehicle that was deemed unsafe for public transportation by the government schools. And instead of letting them go to the scrap heap, we would go purchase them.
Right.
And then we would take untrained drivers that God only knows if they had a license, but they were willing. And we would load up children in these fire traps with bald tires, and we would put 90-plus children in a 60-passenger bus without seatbelts. And then Sunday night, how many remember Sunday night services? You know, they actually happened a while back. But, you know, I mean, and the reality is we would cheer for these felons and put their name on the board.
Yeah.
I mean, how many understand times have changed?
Yeah.
I mean, you pull up in front of a house with a dilapidated old vehicle. How many believe you might as well just paint "pedophiles are us" on the vehicle? I mean, you're changing the paradigm. And by the way, think about this: you as a parent, who would you send? Okay, parent, grandparent, who would you send? Would you just send your kid off with a bunch of strangers? Okay, times have changed. Okay, we're in a different society right now. People need to understand it's a different culture. And they need to recognize that this is the moment to be protecting the church. Because here's some good news. How many could use some good news?
Yeah.
Okay. The law will allow you to discriminate if, number one, it's based on your faith, and number two, you do it fairly. Okay, so let's talk about this for a moment. There are churches, and you don't have to raise your hand, but there are churches here that will limit the senior pastorate to a man. And some of you don't. I understand that, but some of you do. And have you ever thought about, is that legal? I mean, let's think for just a moment. Can women be smarter than men? How many believe they can be? How many believe often they are? Okay. Can they be better communicators? Sure. Can they be better organized? Yeah. Can they, from a performance standpoint, okay, can they in every way do the job? Yeah, they could. Matter of fact, they could be the President of the United States, they could be the CEO of Walmart, because it would be illegal to discriminate. But how many understand, if your church holds the position that this position is reserved for a man, I'm going to do that as illegal discrimination, but it's absolutely protected as a matter of your faith. Now, how many see the parallel in the homosexual movement? That if we as churches say, okay, we love these people, we believe that God can do great things in their lives, we want to see them saved, we want to see them sanctified, but we believe as a church, here is our faith standard. Here's what we're going to hold to, and we are going to enforce it fairly. And by the way, how many believe fairly is across the board? Okay, let me tell you what I built into the bylaws. You'll like this, okay? Anybody that makes a statement in violation of our statement of faith resigned their church membership. I'm going to believe that's just quick and easy. And by the way, some of you don't have members. Some of you, let's survey. How many of you have members? Okay, let me see a church member. Okay. And I realize sometimes members, do a lot. Sometimes they don't do much. Okay, they just kind of vote on the big deal stuff. Some of you are voting on light bulbs. Whatever you want to do is fine. But a membership is a standard there in the church. Okay. Well, here's the bottom line. Somebody says, "Hey, I think the Quran is equal with the Bible." You say, "Brother, you're entitled to your opinion, but you just resigned your membership in our church." I think that homosexuality is just fine. Brother, you're entitled to your opinion, but you just resigned membership in your church. And you say, "Well, David, we used to do church discipline." Well, here's the problem with church discipline. It's messy. And people end up suing. And then it becomes problematic. I'd rather just deal with automatic termination. Here's kind of an easy way to do it. You're liking this. Yeah, this is making sense to you. All right, good. I'm glad we're there. We're connecting. Big guy in the front, want him happy. Okay, but in all that. I mean, here's the bottom line. Let me give you a little thought. Make it harder to get into your church. By the way, how many believe the old warm, breathing, and willing is not the best standard?
Amen.
Because, I mean, you just let somebody in your church to cancel the vote of your preacher. You don't even know who they are. So at least interview them. You know, let them present for membership or put them through a class. I mean, that would be good. Let them actually train a little bit. You know, actually find out they believe like you believe. And by the way, let me just say this. Denominational and doctrinal nuances. Okay? Make sure this person's a good fit for your church. Okay? I mean, if this guy's from a committee-run place and you're a pastoral dictator, how many believe you ought to know that ahead of time? Okay? And then, you know, if you're a big committee guy and this guy's a pastoral dictator type, how many believe that's just a nuance, it's just the way things go, but how many would like to know that before you have a ton of trouble? You know, I mean, if you're a big, you know, you're going to do a lot of different preferences in your ministry. I mean, if you're jamming out, this guy's into stuffy music, or he's into jamming out, you're into stuffy music. I mean, know that ahead of time. Because you might say, brother, you're not going to be happy here. You know, this is a different philosophy, so make it harder to get in. Harder to get in. By the way, that'll avoid a lot of internal church issues. Okay? But then number two, make it way easier to get out. Okay? Just because grandma's buried in the backyard does not mean they get to vote. Okay? I mean, the bottom line is, you know, I mean, here's a basic. Have they shown up in the last year? How many believe they just don't show up? How many think that maybe means they don't care? Okay, now why do they get to vote? And by the way, I mean, I deal with the legal side. Okay? So, I mean, it'll be the new pastor selling the building. I mean, what are all church fights about? Money, you know, who gets the buildings and the cash, and power, who's in charge. You know, who holds the keys and opens the door and stands behind the wall. Okay, that's all the fights. Okay, and you know, here's what every judge is going to do. If you're a membership-based church, now if you're a board church, it's the same thing. It's just the board becomes the membership, the power, the decision makers, whatever it is. They're going to say 51%. Now think about this. Okay, if you got a membership roll of 400, because then when you're in a meeting like this, you can say, well, I have 400 members. You fail to notify us that only 30 show up on any given weekend, but 400 sounds good. Now can I torture you gently? Do you realize your 30 people are powerless? Because if the judge orders, you know, 400 people show up, and all of a sudden these people are voting and doing, and I mean, people that are there don't have any authority. By the way, if you're a little tiny church, watch out for takeovers. There was a guy here in Florida. He had about 30 guys in a rescue mission, and he would look for little struggling churches with assets. And they would come in on a Sunday night and join. And everybody would be like, praise God, we just doubled our membership. And then they'd call for a business meeting, fire the pastor, and sell all the stuff. 100% legal. Now, kind of unethical. I mean, I think that's sort of immoral, but, you know, be careful. You know, if you set it up where these people can literally show up and join, I mean, you know, if the Duggars showed up at your church, they could rule the world. Be careful, 19 of them. You know, I mean, so, you know, you want to try to have it where, you know, they can present for membership, but they don't get that voting authority right off the get-go. So, and remember too, you're allowed to have different standards. Okay, different standards. So let's take the lowest level person at your church. How many can think of the lowest level? The lowest level is called an attender. Okay, what do we require of an attender? Two things. Number one, don't disturb what's going on. And number two, don't smell bad. That's it. I mean, as long as they just sit there and don't stink, we're okay with it. Okay, I mean, as long as they're not disturbing things, they can show up, okay? And if they start disturbing things or they stink too bad, we're going to call the cops and get them gone, okay? Because, you know, they're disturbing what's going on. So attender, pretty low level. They can be a homosexual, they can be lost, they can be a Muslim, they can be a God hater. But, hey, if they'll sit there and behave and not be a disturbance, they can come. Attender, okay. Now, you move up a level, okay? We've talked about members, if you have members. And, you know, now you can put some criteria on. How many think members ought to, like, be saved? Always a nice first step, you know. They actually believe like we believe. Maybe they're going to give money. By the way, you can put any standard you want. You could, I'm not recommending this, just give me a food for thought. You could require all your members to give money. By the way, how many believe that's not a half bad idea? Okay, I've shared this before, but it's my funniest business meeting. I was being hired to represent a holiness church in Georgia. Now, holiness, let me help you. No makeup, hair in the bun. These are godly people, okay? I mean, they look like they are ready. I mean, they're angelic. I mean, they don't look like they sin at all, and they're very nice people. Okay, there's about 30 or 40 of them sitting there, and the pastor stands up, and we're going to have a business meeting. I mean, they look like they've already been to heaven and back. I mean, they look great. Okay, but the pastor starts grilling them before they vote. Here's the vote. Will we hire Mr. Gibbs to represent us in this lawsuit? That's the whole vote, okay? But he starts grilling them, okay? Earl, you got a television in your basement? Well, yeah, preacher, we got one down. We don't watch it, but it's in there. Well, you know how we feel about that sin box. You're not voting today till you get rid of that thing. We don't even allow them in the home. And I'm thinking to myself, I hope he doesn't ask the lawyer anything. This could be bad, you know. You know, I don't know, tell us that I might even turn it on. I'm feeling really bad. But anyway, Thelma, I got a question for you. Looking here at the giving records, are you tithing? Well, yeah, preacher, I'm tithing. Well, I'm going to take your word for it, but it sure doesn't look like they're paying you very much. You know, my hours are down, preacher, but I'm tithing. Well, don't you sit here and rob God and think you're going to vote in this meeting. Now, do I recommend that level of legalism? How many believe that's a little high? Okay. But I'm just sharing it. And by the way, they did vote to hire me and we won the case, so that was good. But, you know, here's the bottom line. You can set the bar wherever you want. And how many believe churches have gotten a little comfortable with the bar being a little too low? Okay, so just realize you have the legal right, based on your faith, to put the bar where you want. So you got attenders and you got members. Now let's move up. What do you have? Leaders, workers. By the way, that's why your child ministry, you need to do background checks. You need to interview these people. That's why your choir, you know, maybe you let the ushers smoke in the parking lot, but you say if you're on the stage, you can't smoke. Okay, you can do that. You know, you have different levels. You can decide. Okay, you know, you set your criteria where you want. You can have different leadership levels for what you require at that level. Then you move to your staff, and then ultimately you move up to your senior pastor. By the way, how many believe we ought to hold our senior pastor to a high level?
Yes.
We're not perfect, and we don't expect you to be, but the man of God is more than just a hireling, and he's an example and how he conducts himself. And so you have that authority within your church to make determinations. So if somebody says, well, you know, are we going to just block homosexuals at the door? Well, I tell you, don't do that. If they're going to come attend and listen and hear you preach, I mean, as long as they're not disturbing what happens, let them in. Now, you say, well, what happens if they do disturb? Can we just, you know, get a couple burly guys and drag them out back? How many believe that's not a good idea? Okay. Now, here's how you get rid of disturbing people. Okay. You ask them to leave. If they won't leave, how many believe you can call the police? And you trespass them. The police have full immunity. Okay. Your ushers drag them out back, you get sued. You know, the guy might have had a bad back for 30 years, but you're going to get sued for his bad back because he's going to say you broke it, dragged me, hurt me. You know, just keep your hands off of them. Even if you have to stop your service, but you have the right to remove anybody. Remember, no free speech rights in your private church. Okay, you understand free speech is only when the government shuts you down. So if you go out on the street and a cop arrests you, that's a free speech violation. Somebody here jumps up and starts babbling and yelling at me and something, what would we do? We'd ask them to please stop. If they don't stop, we'd have them removed. This is a private gathering. Nobody has any free speech rights here to waste your time or mine or disturb this gathering. And so remember, your church is a private gathering. You have the right to tell people. By the way, that's why you can tell a child molester you don't want them to come. Okay, now you may want them to come. That's your decision. You can make determinations. You can evaluate that. But the reality is you want to understand that you as a local church have that authority to make those determinations. So, as a church, what do you want to do with the homosexual agenda? You want to decide what you believe. You want to reduce it to writing. You want to enforce it fairly. Then all of your policies will emanate off of that. How many believe you ought not be doing gay weddings at your church? And you shouldn't be forced to do it. Okay? That can all be in your operational document. You shouldn't be forced to accept people in your membership or on your staff. Or if somebody is on your staff and they hid it from you, how many believe you ought to have the right to terminate? Okay? But it has to be scriptural. Now, by the way, if somebody's on your staff and they're an adulterer and they hid it from you, how many believe you need to act fairly?
Yes, amen.
You're like, wow, that heterosexual sin, it's a little easier for us to, sweep that under the carpet, look the other way. How many believe we need to be fair across the board?
Amen.
Now, I'm going to open the floor to questions here in just a minute. But before I do that, I do have some cards and things. And Paul, can we have a couple of guys help me hand those out? And did those sheets go around, or where did they go? And we will collect them up during the Q&A time later. But I do want you to have these where you can fill these out. If you've already filled out a card for me, still fill one out again. We won't add you to mailing this again, but it'll let me know to send you the bylaws. So if you want to get a copy of that, and just go ahead and fill these out. If you fill out a card, we will presume you want a copy of the bylaws. Okay, and we will email them to you. So fill those out. We'll collect them up, and then again, we will be thrilled if you want to partner with the NCLL from our St. Petersburg office. We will gladly. I will be your attorney. We will help you every way that we can. They're giving you a kind of a sheet that goes through the things we do for our supporters and our friends, and we serve as your general counsel. And again, then the card, once you get it, will be something that you can fill out, and we'll collect those up. And then there's probably one more thing over there. It looks like I've got some prayer bookmarks too. We can hand those out. And that's got a business card at the bottom where you can connect up with us. But we've got about 10 minutes right now, so let me open the floor to questions. Any questions on anything that I have hit? How many have learned at least one thing so far? Let me see your hand. How many are glad you learned it here, not at the courthouse, okay? But let me open the floor to questions. I know you're full of barbecue, but who's our brave person to go first? Yes, sir. You're very kind. Thank you.